Well, does the city of Cape Town have a grip on crimes committed by gangs? The mother city has some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the country, and authorities have tried numerous interventions. And while there was a new intake of law enforcement advancement plan officers earlier this year, the shot spotter technology that uses sensors to locate gunfire has been out of commission since 2019. And how well is the ceasefire project working? We turn now to Alderman J.P. Smith, Cape Town's Mayoral Committee Member for Safety and Security, and Dr. Simon Howell, a criminologist from UCT, to discuss this further. Gentlemen, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. Let's start with you, J.P. What is the status of ShotSpotter, LEAP, and some of the other gang initiatives that were in place? And when they were initiated, certainly seemed to have a lot of potential.
So most of those are still running. We have our gang and drug task team in the city. And perhaps I should preface the comment by reminding you that this remains a core function of the National Police Service. This is a core SAPS competency. And the city can at best augment or extend their functions. And keep in mind that we lack key investigative powers that SAPS have and that are locked in the criminal justice system, which national government exclusively controls. So a frustrating situation for us when, for instance, we do a drug arrest, we have to hand them over. But our gang and drug task team and Metro Police is running strong, increasing in resources, new equipment. We have continuously and steadily expanded our CCTV camera footprints in vulnerable areas with around 6,000 crime detections this last year. And LEAP has now been targeted very much, and our stabilization unit at those areas which are driving the stats where communities are exposed to the most serious crime patterns and violent crime at that. So the first about 600 LEAP officers now underway, with more ones coming out every night. And last night I was out with the new LEAP officers that have just been deployed to Kraaifontein in Bloekombos, Wallerstein, Scottsville and Scottsdene. And we made an exciting drug arrest there. So those interventions are going strong, along with the K9 unit. The investigating officers, we're now pairing with these units to try and do watching briefs on their cases so that we get convictions, so that we can lift the rather appalling 2 or 3% conviction rate that we see for gang-related murders, and try and get those conviction rate up for firearm and drug arrests that we effect daily, but that if you don't watch them carefully, often don't go anywhere.
Simon, it sounds certainly from what we've heard from J.P. Smith that the city's doing its best, but is it passing the buck with regards to saying it's being let down by national policing and the National Prosecuting Authority?
I think the relationship between the City of Cape Town's law enforcement officers and the South African Police Service is quite complex and often undermines both their aims of, providing security, but also undermines their ability to process cases through the criminal justice system. That relationship has been complex for a long time, and I think, unless someone really begins to work on it, these problems will continue. They do ultimately undermine policing as a whole. So, it's up to law enforcement to begin working towards a more cohesive relationship, I would think.
JP, there seems to have been an ongoing problem, and there's always politics involved with the DA-run city and an ANC-led competency within SAPS on a national level. Can the two ever meet and come to some kind of entente cordiale, if you like?
I think that has happened a long time ago. This constant repetition of this narrative of an unsustainable or challenged relationship exists only on a political level, where it will always exist, because we will never be able to be excited about what national government is doing with SAPS. When I go to a police station and I'm told by the station commissioner that he now has one officer for every 1,800 members of the public, I can't be excited about that. When a detective tells me he has more than 200 cases to handle, must I keep quiet and tell the community that that is okay? No, I can't. I have to say that that's a problem, and of course that creates political tension. But on an operation level, just looking at the footage you're displaying now, you will see that there's SAPS and law enforcement working in a completely integrated manner. We supported them, and last night the senior SAPS officer said to me, we can't do these operations with you, we can't hit the big drug houses without your LEAP officers, because there aren't enough of us on duty on this shift. your additional numbers last night made it possible for us to go and hit these big houses. So our staff are sharing information, working together. Again, last week, before the weekend, when I was out in Delft, it was SAPS and Metro Police working closely together. So that's become more of a narrative than a reality on the ground, where staff work very well. Some police stations have major challenges. The manner in which the station commissioner approaches issue often creates problems. But I would say that by and large, that grassroots relationship works well. We have a brilliant working relationship with the provincial commissioner and the provincial department, community safety. Patakile, as the PC, is accessible and works well with us and is very practically and crime fighting orientated. We're working hard together on the Smarter Cities initiative to bring our IT and other systems towards closer integration. But the biggest devil in all of this is that SAP's resources are severely constrained in terms of the number of detectives, the boots on the ground. They are suffering badly, and that is, of course, requiring the city to draw more and more resources into this challenge, into this issue, which really isn't a core local government competency. And when we do that, we forsake other core local government responsibilities.
Simon, let's go to you. Do you think the city could be doing anything better? And what are your thoughts on what JP's had to say?
Well, I think ultimately it comes down to how do we measure success and how do we measure what we wish to do in terms of crime. The City of Cape Town tends to measure success in a framework which is one that prioritizes reacting to problems. So, for instance, success is determined in terms of arrests and how many police are on the ground and what, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the larger or the other concern would be, or the other way of measuring this would be to say, well, is success defined as solving the problem? And the problem of gangsterism has been one that has remained in Cape Town for a very long time now. And despite many millions being spent and many police officers and many resources being thrown at the problem, it doesn't seem to actually curtail it in any significant long-term way. So, of course, the question is, what is success here? How do we define this? In terms of law enforcement and police working together, I think, the JP says on the ground they can work together, but ultimately are undermined by structural issues and concerns that may stem at a political level.
Just to give each of you a quick reply to this question before we wrap up. JP, you first. Can the police and Metro actually solve the gangster problem, or is it a far wider issue?
I think Simon is right. This is a deeply rooted problem. It has deep historical roots. It is deeply embedded now through corrupt police and corrupt elements within the criminal justice system that offer protection. There's constant books and exposés written on the topic that allows us insight into exactly how dark and murky this world has become and how organized crime has entrenched itself in government. And that makes it difficult to fight, especially because as local government, you have very little levers over the criminal justice system. You don't control the investigative powers, the NPA, the DOJ, or the DCS. Those are things outside of our and province's reach. And if those don't work well, you will always have a very low ceiling for what you can achieve just with visible policing. And when this last year, Leap alone took 77 firearms off the street. So that's a real thing you can measure. That's why we talk about it. It's a demonstrable issue. Many of the larger outcomes, and I would completely agree with Simon that the ultimate measure is, does gang violence overall, do we see a cessation or reduction in gang violence? And that answer is more complicated because there we rely on other partners to step up to this plate as extensively as the city has. And I don't think you'll find another local government in South Africa that's made the kind of investments that we've made in this context. But we're also not only investing in policing. There are a great number of social investments. The ceasefire intervention you talked about was a social investment, a developmental investment, which is still running in Hanover Park. I'd like to see it expanded more broadly. And we've made investments in entrepreneur development, in gender-based violence components of this, in the drug demand side of the equation, through the matrix clinics and outreach programs. So there's not a component of the issue that the city is not trying to impact on through a whole of society holistic approach, of course, heavily constrained by the kind of funds local government can throw at this whilst doing housing delivery, keeping potholes filled, supplying water and electricity, and the other core constitutional competencies.
JP, thanks so much. Simon, a quick wrap from you. JP certainly sounds very convincing that law enforcement is doing its best. Are you convinced?
I think, law enforcement is prioritized and seen as a core component of dealing with gangsterism. But ultimately, there needs to be a far wider scale of interventions that include many social and, economic and skills development type programs. I think we tend to prioritize or focus on law enforcement activities when, in fact, it's a wider net of social services that will ultimately be the means by which to solve the problem. Ultimately, we do tend to focus on law enforcement, but, a lot more needs to be done, I think, especially at the grassroots level in terms of relevance and making the programs and interventions speak to the likely youth of that may end up in gangs, essentially.
Thank you so much. That was the City of Cape Town's JP Smith and Dr. Simon Howell, a criminologist with UCT.